world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to ReBank, a visionary podcast about banking, fintech, and the future. The future of banking is here. Hello and welcome to ReBank. I'm your host, Will Beeson. Today we're thrilled to be joined by Eugene Danilkis. Eugene is co-founder and CEO of Mambu, a banking technology provider based in Berlin. Eugene is literally a rocket scientist. He led a software engineering team developing NASA-certified software for the International Space Station prior to founding Mambu. Mambu is a cloud-based technology platform that enables banks and fintechs to rapidly address new market opportunities and reduce the high costs previously associated with software licenses, maintenance, and in-house infrastructure. Mambu supports a range of customers all over the world, including Oak North Bank, a new UK bank we covered in episode 11. If Oak North's early success is any indication, Mambu is a powerful platform. We've touched on core technology in a few episodes so far, which has been a conscious decision. Even with all the coverage around fintech, it can be tough to get clear, comprehensive insight into one of the most important components of banking and fintech success, core technology. As always, connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and on our website, bankingthefuture.com. We reached out earlier this week for questions from the audience for Eugene, and we were thrilled with the result. We picked a couple today that got at key components of Mambu and what they do. We look forward to sourcing questions for future episodes as we go. Keep an eye out on Twitter, and as always, feel free to submit ideas, questions, topics of interest, and even potential guests via our website. Thanks so much for joining us today. Please welcome Eugene Danilkis. Eugene, welcome to ReBank. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Will.
What's Mambu?
Mambu is a rethinking of how lending and banking organizations manage their services. It's effectively a platform for them to design and launch a whole broad range of different lending and deposit products. So everything from consumer and business-based products, banking and lending products, of course, and to help them launch and service those products. So basically in Mambu, it's you go in and you design a new loan and deposit product. You define all the different parameters that you have for how you want to service that product and all the different products you have. And then you start to offer that to your customers and you track all the repayments and the transactions that go into it. It's effectively a really rethinking of a banking and lending platform, but built in a cloud-first SaaS model.
Do you characterize it as a core banking system in the traditional sense?
Not particularly, actually. I mean, there's obviously overlap with it, and obviously we have some customers who come to us and they look at it as a core banking system. But we see it as a little bit different in the sense that from the way that most core banking systems were designed, it's really a lot about just handling the transactions. Where Mambu is, in a way, a little bit more and a little bit less than that. So it's more in the sense of it provides more of the functionality you need to manage your whole entire portfolio of customers. So everything to do with your customer data, the whole entire life cycle of a loan application and everything else. But it's a little bit less in the sense that it's not a system that you go and customize like a core banking system where you kind of buy, an essence of a system and then you go customize it for your needs. Mambu is kind of a single platform which our customers then integrate out into additional services. So it's a little bit different, I guess, than the traditional approaches to core banking systems, but naturally a lot of the projects we have it used for when it's used in banking is being compared to a core banking system.
Okay, so it sounds like there's like a bit of CRM functionality in it as well, just kind of pushing some of the core banking functionalities a bit broader than what traditionally they've done.
Yeah, the way the metaphor we like to use for our customers is if they're designing a new business around, let's say they want to do small business lending of different types, Mambu really sits for them as an engine, and what they are building out is fundamentally the car. So they then have to, design the body of the car. That could be the customer experience. It could be the mobile app that they bring out to the customer. They have to still put in a few other pieces like figuring out how they do the credit scoring. There's a few other pieces which they tie in to build that complete car, but fundamentally they're getting an engine as a service from us that's going to help drive that whole entire business. But we're not offering to sell them the complete car and complete end-to-end solution. We're providing an engine for them, and one that's hopefully flexible enough from both their business side, but also their technical side, such that they can build and change whatever car they want in the future, so that they have a lot of flexibility if they want to, put in different wheels or give it a spoiler later on or completely recode the body. They have that kind of flexibility with us. And so we're really focusing on the engine piece of it and being that one source of everything to do with their customers' account and transaction data.
Mm-hmm. And how did the concept come about? Was there a specific kind of business need that you guys were looking to deliver for, or was it broader than that?
So it came about actually by us looking at some of the trends that were happening in emerging markets around mobile money. We were kind of looking at the opportunity of what was going to happen in emerging markets where you had a few billion people that were going to come in to have mobile phone access and internet access, and they had poor access to financial services. So we were initially kind of looking at the emerging markets and those underbanked people, if you will, and we were projecting how is this space going to evolve in the next 10, 15 years. It seemed very natural that, of course, there's going to be smartphones, everyone's going to have smartphones, everyone's going to have internet access, and the banking services, lending and deposits would be provided to them in a much more digital way because it simply wasn't cost effective enough to reach them through a branch-based approach. And then we looked at what sort of system would you need to have to be able to provide this kind of omni-channel experience to customers, such that they can do mobile banking, such that you can have people going out and originating loans at the place of business as opposed to having the customers come to you. And we realized that the systems that kind of existed were really kind of slow and prohibitive from organizations to bring these products to markets. Specifically, doing things like integrating to mobile money or building out a modern, Android application nowadays is extremely easy. Very trivial to do. Most developers in high school or university could build out those sort of systems and integrate them. And the problem that we realized was actually in the back end, because you're building out that mobile app or that mobile payments app is relatively easy, but the problem then becomes how do you actually integrate that back into the business? And organizations we saw either had very complex banking systems that weren't particularly integration friendly, and that became the huge challenge of them being able to integrate all of those modern digital experiences back into the core. So then we took the approach of let's rethink this from a modern approach of the way that Salesforce kind of rethought CRM and NetSuite kind of rethought ERP. What if we apply the same sort of software as a service model thinking to lending and banking? What would that platform look like? And that's what led us to design and build Mambu.
Actually, this is interesting. So I'm involved in a startup bank in the UK right now, and one of the things that we've spent a lot of time on is designing our systems and thinking about effectively the way to build a back end that allows us to deliver what we want to on the front end. So, of course, that's things like savings, current accounts, and lending, but it's also things like risk management, compliance, treasury functions, regulatory reporting, and a whole host of other components.
Right.
How comprehensive is Mambu's offering at this point, and what are the plans for the future?
So our focus explicitly both in the short term and going forward is to really focus on providing flexibility around the different products you can design and service to your customers. So a lot of the challenges that people have with traditional systems was if you wanted to change the pricing of a product, or you wanted to change or to try out, do an A/B testing with a few different products or come up with a new product specs, that would often require coders to come in and make changes to your core banking system, and then that would have huge fallout implications for everything you're integrated to. So we focus on making that completely seamless by just providing it through a user interface where you can just create and define the products that you want. So we're kind of focusing on just that functionality in the sense of all the different types of consumer and business type of lending and deposit products you want to service, and of course all the supporting functionality you need around that, such as we touched on the CRM piece, accounting, and all of that as well. So where we don't want to get into is kind of the peripheral, if you will, areas around it. So things like compliance, treasury, finance, finance, regulatory reporting are things which are enabled by Mambu in the sense that you have all of the data, you have the transaction history, you have everything you need to be able to do those functions. But we believe there's other companies and other products that can do each of those things better. And in each different market, there might be a specific market leader that is the go-to for regulatory reporting in the UK. But there might be other providers. Some of our organizations prefer to do that actually themselves in-house. So our goal is actually to provide as flexible enough of a platform, which itself is very open because of the data and the APIs that we have around it, and then allow our customers to integrate to the best of breed products or build out their own solutions for those. So our approach is to really kind of create that open ecosystem, if you will, around it, as opposed to us trying to completely own the complete stack and say, here is the Mambu mobile banking platform, and here's the Mambu UK regulatory module, and all of those things. So we're going to stay away from that and try to look for best of breed providers in those areas and in different markets.
So I guess two questions coming out of that. One, how easy is it to integrate Mambu into a range of some of these third-party systems? And second question, does that create higher costs effectively for your customers if they're buying multiple systems from multiple suppliers?
On the first side of the integration side of it, it depends. Integrating Mambu is often a lot easier because we have one standard platform with one set of APIs and one standard data dictionary around it. So using Mambu and using the APIs to either push or pull data in means that you pretty much can be any developer that's familiar with working with even Facebook APIs could be working with Mambu right away. So right away you get out of the area of having to be a Mambu specialist, for instance, and knowing the inner workings of Mambu to just being able to interact with the API layer, and being able to use whatever programming languages you want and you're comfortable with. So the work required in both the requirements gathering and the time that it takes to build and test something is often a few times faster than it would with a closed off, much more complex core banking system that is actually usually customized for different clients. So those times for integrations drops very drastically. Now the partner you're integrating to may have APIs themselves, or they might work with files, but they definitely have some way to get data in and out. But the challenge always in integrations was always the core because it was always so complex. And that's the challenge we're eliminating with our single code base effectively and our API layer.
It sounds like one of the strengths of Mambu is that in not being a traditional core banking system in all senses, it can effectively, or in fact, it's designed to support a range of businesses. So it's not simply banks looking to provide all products to all customers, but also a number of lending platforms, micro lenders, fintech companies. Do you find that you've been able to differentiate in various segments of the financial services market?
Yeah, incredibly so. I mean, if anything, I would say that we're one of the characteristics of our company, even at this fairly young stage, is the fact that we have such a diversity of customers, both in the type of products they offer, but also geographies. I mean, we have about 170 or so live different sites for our customers in some 40 odd countries, and they're doing everything from exactly as you described. They're either doing, some micro loans. We have customers that do very complex multi-tranche credit arrangements of into the tens of millions of pounds for complex businesses. We're having now additional customers that are doing things like mortgages, and others that are doing payday lending, and others that are using it for just tracking deposits or supporting a current account model. So the flexibility of Mambu, which is really designed for one customer to be able to bring whatever products they have to market, is also then allowing us to support a very broad range of different types of customers and operating in very different geographies with very different other technology ecosystems around them.
Maybe I'll actually ask you for two stories of implementations where Mambu's live that reflect the different ends of that spectrum that you mentioned. The first question I guess I'd have is there a specific use case, maybe in an emerging country, where you're supporting an innovative business around micro-lending, microfinance, in a way that potentially wasn't possible prior to the creation of a system like Mambu?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, microfinance is kind of the place where we started from, and I mean, it's becoming a decreasing, I guess, percentage of the number of projects we work on, but there's still some very interesting examples of it. The challenge with microfinance, or specifically, the challenge with microfinance has been the fact that you're basically trying to do low value loans, trying to do them at the volume and trying to reduce the transaction costs, or so basically the operating costs of providing the services. And that's what makes microfinance models quite difficult to run as a sustainable business in a lot of these countries. We have a project out in East Africa operating right now, I think now in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and I believe Zimbabwe as well. They're out in 4 or 5 countries by now, where they've basically rethought the whole entire model in a digital-first approach. So instead of having actual branches, they're leveraging they're giving a tablet to credit officers who are just simply going to different markets, they're going to clients, they're going to businesses, and they're setting up effectively little light branches. And this is for the sales side of it, to find new customers, to onboard customers, and to go visit existing customers. So it's drastically reducing kind of that operational footprint by doing everything digitally. And on the back end, they're taking out a lot of the payments issues by using M-Pesa, which is a mobile payments channel. So they're reducing as much cash as possible and doing payments and disbursements through mobile money. And then they're also leveraging our APIs to do a little bit of process automation, so driving loans through a little bit of a light decisioning process, and streamlining a bunch of their operations just through automating some of the processes. And they kind of tweak that as they go along. So if they need to change how they do scoring from one type of customer to another, they don't use the traditional credit bureau. They use some of the past data they have, a little bit of their own heuristics about the nature of the customer, and they can change those kind of models themselves very quickly. So as a result, they've been growing really fast, and they have a very relatively lean and streamlined business for this market segment.
And the other example that maybe you can talk about a bit is some mutual friends of ours, Oak North Bank in the UK, who we've had on the podcast in the past, and who I know use your systems, and in fact sing very high praises of Mambu. Can you tell us a bit about the work that you do with Oak North?
Yeah, so the Oak North story is, I guess almost at the complete opposite end of the spectrum from the project in Africa, because there we're talking about loans of hundreds of thousands, if not into the millions, and much more complex and bespoke loan arrangements. So they're not a story that's trying to do tens and thousands of different loans for small businesses. They're trying to come up with really well-tailored, specific pricing and complex credit arrangements for more sophisticated small businesses that need the loan. So their use case of Mambu is a little bit different. While they still have all the usual things of automating, direct debit and connecting it to their web interface and all the basics without really having much of an IT team to support it, their primary value out of Mambu is the flexibility in the different types of products, the pricing you can set up, the fees, and all the other things you can have flexibility of, so you can come up with relatively bespoke products and pricing arrangements for customers on a case-by-case basis. So it's really quite a different use case, because it's not scaling out a standard loan to thousands of customers, but actually looking at the customer need and coming up with a more of a tailored loan product for them.
One of the things we did in preparation for this interview was to tap into our audience via Twitter and get some questions specific to Mambu and the work that you guys are doing. And Oak North actually came back with what I thought was an interesting one, and it's around cloud-based architectures, something that Oak North has definitely embraced. I believe they're the first bank in the UK to run out of the cloud via AWS. Their question specifically is, do you envision more banks moving to cloud?
I think it's pretty much inevitable. You've seen that in the actions of the different regulators. We ourselves have talked to regulators here in Europe. Obviously, we have a lot of work with the UK. We've even talked to a few regulators in Africa as well. And once they understand the benefits that cloud provides, both for the banks and the lending companies that use it, and also the risk it reduces in their local market, it's really a no-brainer fundamentally. why they should encourage the adoption of it. The sort of infrastructure in terms of security, data protection, data security that you can have with a properly built cloud infrastructure far exceeds what most non-tier 1 banks would be able to do themselves. So if the goal is to encourage that in the market, then cloud adoption from the regulatory side is increasingly becoming encouraged. From the customer side, i.e. from someone like Oak North, it also makes plenty of sense because you're not looking to build out data centers and manage that, and the chances that you as a relatively small organization compared to a global powerhouse like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft with their Azure service, that you would be able to invent and manage such a data center and infrastructure the same level of quality, security, and scale and redundancy is unimaginable. So trying to re-leverage that and use that for both your cost, for your security, for your ease of scalability, makes total sense for the customers.
As it relates specifically to Mambu, how does hosting and access work in practice via the cloud? And do you guys offer local hosting as an option?
So we work right now effectively just with Amazon Web Services, and Amazon provides multiple data centers. So for someone like Oak North, we use obviously the different European data centers. For our other customers in US and Latin America and Asia Pacific, we use their other data centers and regions as needed for them. We provide effectively two main models of deployment with Amazon Web Services. Our first one, which is more common for the smaller organizations and startup banks and some of the fintech companies, is our multi-tenanted model. It's probably a similar model that if you're using a company like Salesforce, you use, where everyone is effectively sharing the same infrastructure, even though all of your data is completely separated. And for some customers, for some banks and for larger organizations, they get more of a dedicated environment. So it means they have their own set of servers fundamentally, which gives them a little bit more fine-grained security controls and access. So for instance, preventing their entire Mambu environment from being accessed from the public internet. So you won't even be able to go into that environment, and having custom deployment schedules and other things like that. But all of it is still running on the exact same infrastructure and using the same Amazon Web Services across the globe.
It doesn't surprise me that regulators in more traditional environments have been slow to adopt forward-looking thinking, specifically as it relates to things like cloud-based back-end technology at regulated institutions like banks. What have those conversations been like, and how have you and I imagine some of the partners that you work with approached regulators on that subject? And what has the process been like to get regulators comfortable with cloud solutions?
It's really been just a process of understanding their needs and concerns. I mean, we don't really see regulators as an enemy in this. They're trying to protect the interests of the consumers in those markets, and they want to make sure that the banks, lending organizations are managing technology in the way that reduces the risk fundamentally in the local market, which is very much the same goal that we have as well, of providing an infrastructure that's redundant and secure. So our goals are fundamentally aligned. The challenge we have with them is to understand specifically their needs and concerns and the sort of scenarios they want to understand how the bank would deal with, and be able to explain to them how do we support those in our environment. So for instance, in the old world, if a bank went down before and you had to get its data and figure out which customer had which accounts, in the absolute worst case, you would physically go to a data center and go pull the server off the rack, and then just go work with a database and try to sort out whose customers were whose. And that was really, the worst case of grabbing the data from the bank. Now, if the database sits in a data center of Amazon whose physical location is not actually disclosed, you could still support that. You just have to do it a little bit differently, because you probably shouldn't go physically into the Amazon data center and physically pull out a rack, because the data probably doesn't even sit on one particular server. It might be spread across a few, but there's ways to logically extract data and to have it backed up and to have it in a way that you can still manage the worst case scenario. So it's really just basically understanding their needs and explaining to them how all of them are addressed with the way that we're using Amazon Web Services and the way that we're using the cloud infrastructure.
How do you approach increasing concerns around cybersecurity? Is Mambu better or worse at ensuring system security than other providers?
Our approach to it is that there's a few levels of security that you have. One of it, of course, at the very basic level is the physical data center security, and then you move up to the application level, and then you move up to like the logical layer of how do you actually prevent and control user rights and access. There's obviously different levels of security, and our point is that at each level, by having someone who specializes and focuses on that and to develop the best level of security possible at each level, you'll do much better than rather having each bank and each fintech company and each telco trying to do that, because it's very hard to imagine there'll be a specialist across the whole entire stack. So for instance, we don't have to be experts in knowing how to physically protect a data center, because we leverage Amazon for that, and they invest billions of dollars into people, into the technology, into testing and processes, so they are best in breed in that. So we ourselves don't have to become experts in that. And likewise for our customers, the levels that we invest into the application levels of security, of ourselves doing our own penetration testing twice a year and making adjustments to it, ourselves keeping up with the latest threats and making adjustments to Mambo as needed, we get to become specialists and get to do that on better than any individual customer would be able to do that themselves, because it's of simple resource allocation. They wouldn't have the resources, it would be too expensive or too costly for them to do all of that themselves and to repeat the same effort that we're doing at the application level and the same level that Amazon is doing at the database and data center level.
In your view, what are the strengths and weaknesses of existing core banking systems, the traditional players in the space? And traditional models, architectural models.
So I mean, there's definitely strength to them. I mean, by having the whole entire code base and application to it, there's really nothing you fundamentally, I guess, can do if you spend enough money and time on it, because you have access to the whole entire. It's a toolkit fundamentally, and it's a framework which you can customize, and you can make it completely tailored to your business. But there's a very high cost that goes with it. And I don't just mean necessarily the commercial cost, although that is part of it. It's also the fact that as you make all of those very specific and custom tailored specializations for your business inside the core system, you're making it increasingly harder and harder for your business to move forward and make further changes later on, because you end up having such a specialized system. And by making those changes internally in the system, every single integration you want to do later on, every additional product pricing change, or every other transformation you might want to do of your business becomes increasingly hard. So you kind of get stuck in this process of all the things you've built up and the legacy you've changed in your own core system by customizing it for how you think the world should be today. But then when the world quickly changes in the next 2-3 years, as it does technology-wise, you're now in a much more difficult position to be able to change what you've done, because you had this huge project of completely customizing the system to exactly what you needed to do and exactly what you needed to integrate with, today for 2017. But the reality is that the customer need and the technologies you want to integrate with and everything else is going to change so quickly in the next couple of years, is that investment is what's actually going to hurt you later on, and you'll be much slower in making changes in the market going forward.
Question that we received via our website from Joel Koppelman is around the potential for transition of incumbent banks using incumbent systems to new platforms like Mambu. Is it possible for an existing bank to transition to something like Mambu, or do you guys really compete in the new build space?
I think it's possible. I think the question is just of how do you go about doing so. I think the projects that you've seen before was, the hundreds of millions or $1 billion, 5-7 year transformation projects of trying to re-architect everything from day one and then working on that for 5 years. I think there's less appetite for that approach, and I think it's less likely that it's going to work overall as a model, as a transformation. So we've seen kind of a couple models that sort of that have been working a little bit better. The first one is, like you said, is a little bit of a greenfield approach, where the organization is actually launching something that is new, but fundamentally might actually be competing or cannibalizing its own core business later on. And the thinking there being it's better to try to cannibalize your own business with a digital first offering than frankly to have some other bank do that or to have another fintech company do that. So you end up basically creating a competing brand or digital entity which you know might steal customers from your original business. But again, it's probably better for you to be stealing your own customers than for your competitors. And in that way, if that actually works, then effectively you end up having customers migrate from your old business to your new business, if you will, from your bank 1.0 to 2.0, which is more digital first, usually a cloud-based sort of offering. So that's been kind of one approach. The other one, which is still coming back to the transformation, is by looking at the business units and operational needs. So instead of saying, okay, we have 20 different business units and they're all running on this one massive core, let's try to find one new massive core that's going to be able to do the exact same stuff but better. The idea has been to give a little bit more operational flexibility for each business unit and come up with the right technology stack that's needed for it. So maybe Mambu is really well suited for your small business lending unit, and maybe it's really poorly suited for your mortgage business for whatever reason. But then you're looking at it from a business point of view, and you're using something like Mambu as that engine for the operations of that business. That creates a little bit of overhead in that you have to then create, a central database if you want to have complete across the business BI and things like that. But it gives a lot more operational flexibility to each business unit as it goes along.
If you talk to traditional core banking providers, they'll tell you that their systems are able to achieve real-time like results via fixes like middleware, even when some of these systems were built decades ago using batch processing. And there's some other, I suppose, elements of particular concern around some older systems. In your mind, what question should banks and fintechs ask system vendors before buying? What other considerations should they have?
I think the question they should be asking, maybe not so much to the vendors, is to themselves, because the approach of using a system like Mambo or most software as a service or cloud platforms is one that's actually more iterative or agile thinking. And by that, I mean that at the point of when you are acquiring the system or you're doing a transformation, you are fairly confident you know what your worldview looks like in the next 12 months. You're moderately confident is how it looks in the 18, 24 months. And you acknowledge to yourself that you have little confidence as to how it will look like in the next 36 to 48 months going forward. And that kind of changes how you build things, because you build things in a way that you don't invest everything in day one and saying, I'm building this and it's going to last exactly this way for the next 7 years. And I hope nothing else changes, because if it does, then I'm going to be in trouble. So you kind of build it out in a way that allows for more iterative thinking, which means coming back to the whole process of changing your products or using things like APIs to plug and play different pieces. You're building a much more loosely coupled, more easily changeable system. Now, if you can achieve exactly that with a traditional vendor and they can explain to you how they do that, then that's great. But that sort of approach has recently been one of the strengths of software as a service companies, exactly because of things like using APIs for integration and because of the way the software is designed to be able to configure your products instead of customize the system.
Tell us a bit about your journey from starting Mambu to where you are today. I guess maybe we can start with some of the technology decisions. Building a platform from scratch. Did you integrate existing components of systems into Mambu? Did you design everything from scratch, from the bottom up? What did that process look like?
We obviously looked for ways that we can get to market quicker in the early days, and we looked to see if there was different pieces of technology which we can reuse and didn't have to completely reinvent everything from scratch. But the more we looked, the more we realized there wasn't anything that we would feel comfortable to use as the core of Mambu. So we decided it made sense to actually rebuild that and design everything from the database architecture up to the application level ourselves. So that obviously involved a larger investment and effort in the first couple of years, but we were also slightly able to mitigate that by the fact that we didn't try to do everything at once. So as I mentioned, in the early days, it was more organizations using Mambu for short-term lending fundamentally, and there wasn't anything on deposits or current accounts or even things like accounting, or the CRM functionality was relatively loose. So it started off as a very much a lending engine in the early days, and we were able to kind of evolve around that and work with the different customers and projects we have to move the platform forward. So it was a larger investment in the beginning to really architect it from the application and the cloud from scratch, effectively from day one. But I think now it's really starting to pay off because we have complete ownership and knowledge of every system. We can completely modify everything from how we configure our servers to everything on the application layer to the API layer. We have complete ownership of the stack and can drive it whichever way we need to, because just like banks, we don't know necessarily what technology is going to look like in the next 3-5 years as well. So we also need to be, as a provider, be able to be flexible enough to adopt new technologies ourselves and offer the same benefits to our customers too.
Thinking forward over the next 5 years, what are Mambu's goals? Is it growing number of customers? Is it expanding into new regions? Is it continuing to build out the platform?
Yeah, so the platform evolution will continue very naturally. I mean, there's plenty to be done, of course, like every tech company. So we'll be continuing to evolve our own product and platform. So it's going to get deeper in terms of all the things we just talked about, the different types of products you can service in it, and continuing to innovate around things like performance and security and all those sort of things that is just a given in a software as a service model that we have with our customers. If we kind of look at what we actually want to be then in the next 5 years, we really see ourselves as being the global SaaS platform for innovative lending and banking initiatives. And when I say innovative, I mean a couple of different things around that. I mean innovative in terms of obviously a greenfield venture, which is by its very nature most likely going to be trying to do things that's different, but also going to be for organizations that aren't necessarily thinking, okay, I've been on my version of core banking system for the last 15 years, my license is running out, I need to keep doing the exact same thing, and I just need to renew, my license. Mambu's probably not going to be the right solution for those types of organizations. But for organizations that see that there's a drastically changing ecosystem in the fintech space that they can integrate with, the way they can change their processes, the way they can automate a lot of their processes, all the different products and services they can bring to market, and they see themselves as wanting to be able to take advantage of that and transform their business to be a leading lending or banking company, not in 2015, but in 2020 and 2030, when the whole entire ecosystem of technology around finance is going to be drastically different. Those are the sort of customers we want to be working with. And we see ourselves as being the number one SaaS platform in terms of the number of projects that we're doing with those types of organizations. And we're really quite agnostic, again, if those projects are coming, as they are right now, from either traditional banks, we're working with a tier 1 bank here in Europe, or it's coming from a fintech startup, or it's coming from really left field where we're working with telcos who are looking to get into the lending space and take advantage of their multi-million customer base and provide financial services to them. So the organizations providing this next wave of lending and banking products, we're fairly agnostic to that. The question is, what is the product and what is the service they want to offer? And are they trying to do that in a digital first way?
What advice would you have for entrepreneurs considering building technology for banking or financial services? What do you wish you had done differently?
It's a challenge in the sense that a lot of customers, a lot of prospects you'll be talking to will want to see proof points. So no one wants to be the first one that's adopting a new technology in a space like this, especially mission critical technology. So one thing I would definitely encourage is go work on it from a project point of view, more so than just imagining what a platform could look like in the future. And so keep the track that you want to have for your product and keep your product vision, but in the earlier days, start to engage earlier with the customers and start to understand what are their specific needs, what are their concerns. Don't necessarily build for those, but understand the drivers and the motivations and their thinking behind it, and work with them to define your model. one of the things I think that was a strength for us is the fact that, unlike most traditional core banking systems, which were usually built out by one bank who was funding the project, and then it spun off to become a general core banking system, Mambo was never really built for any one customer in particular. But having said that, I do wish we worked with a few other organizations, maybe with banks and maybe leading lending companies earlier on, so we can understand better what their concerns and needs are in their existing platforms, and having collaborated a bit closer with them in the early days.
Eugene, what's the best way for people to find out more about Mambu and connect with you directly?
Yeah, so of course you can just find us on mambu.com, and you can fill out the contact information there as well, and then I'll reach out to my team, and if you want to learn more about the platform, then we'll route it to the right person, or if you have questions for me as well, then that will also just get directed right to me as well.
Great. Eugene Danilkis, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks for tuning into ReBank. If you like today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at ReBank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, fintech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.